Well, we come now to have a look at the rise of Babylon the Great in the personages of Cush and Nimrod and Semiramis. And we'll be dealing with those three characters in the main in the course of the next 45-50 minutes or so. And this is not quite so challenging in terms of expositional requirements to think hard, but it is, I think, very interesting for those of us who know where the system comes from and who seek its destruction. And we, of course, in that are with our God. He seeks its destruction and its replacement by the kingdom of God upon the earth. Because what we're dealing with here is the development of the kingdom of men. Of course, this is a well-known Christadelphian chart that goes right back to our origins in Elpis Israel of 1848, 1849. And this is what Brother Thomas presents in the third part of Elpis Israel. Here is Nebuchadnezzar's image, which has its origins, of course, beginning with Babylon, and that goes right back to Nimrod. Nimrod is the founder of Babylon. So he, as we shall see, founded the Assyro-Babylonian Empire, followed by the Medo-Persians, etc. Those same pieces of the image are represented by the four beasts: the lion, the bear, the leopard, and of course the fourth beast, the Roman beast, probably in the form of a crocodile of some kind. Over here on the right hand side of the chart, of course, we have the shadow of that image, because it's the kingdom of men that the Lord Jesus Christ will destroy. The kingdom of men in the latter days has as its highlight feature the system of Catholicism, which of course has its roots deep in the work of Nimrod. It's called Babylon the Great, mother of harlots. We're going to see where that all came from in our study tonight. It's all from Genesis chapter 10 and 11, the whole lot of it. And prophecy beyond Genesis is all based on this section of Scripture. Now let's just quickly review the beginnings of this Assyro-Babylonian Empire. As you can see, we've got the dates of the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign from BC 606 through to 539, when Cyrus overthrew them. But however, this is actually Nimrod's kingdom. This is where Babylon was originally established, and of course his second mega city was up here in Nineveh, in the cities surrounding it, and we'll have a look at that a little later on. So he is responsible for the development of these two powers, Babylon and Assyria. So this empire, called the Assyro-Babylonian Empire, of course, is the work of Nimrod. Nebuchadnezzar being its first significant king in that period of history where God was bringing judgment upon his people Israel. He was to use these four beasts to do that over time. So when you look at the imagery that's presented in Daniel chapter 7, we have, of course, this curious feature. The first beast, which is Babylon, the Assyro-Babylonian lion, it's like a lion. It had eagle's wings. Eagle's wings? Yes. See, so when you go to the British Museum, you see these lion-like creatures with wings. Now this represents the Assyrian element of that empire. Now we are told in Daniel 7 verse 4, I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked. So there was a transition from the Assyrians to the Babylonians. They both had the origins in Nimrod, but power passed from the Assyrians to the Babylonians in time. So the wings were plucked, it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. The reason for that, of course, is that there was a transition from the Assyrians, who were brutal, callous in their treatment of their enemies, to the Babylonians, who were not quite so bad. There was a little bit more of humanity in the Babylonians, though not much more. Now this is a line from the Ishtar Gate, and we'll talk about the Ishtar Gate a little later on. What I want you to see, though, is that in dealing with the Assyro-Babylonian Empire, with these two elements of Assyria and Babylon, we are talking about the same thing, because their origins were in Nimrod. He was the founder of the kingdom of men. Now this is the only thing that has ever been found that archaeologists believe represents the visage of Nimrod. He was negroid. He was of the race of the family of Ham. And Ham was the father of the dark races. So Nimrod, who becomes the first pope, the first god king of the earth, was black. And I personally believe that if not the last, and I think it probably will be the last, but if not the last, between now and the destruction of this system in 2060, which we spoke about last evening, one of those popes will be a black man. Probably the last one, because the first pope was a black man. Very interesting, isn't it? But that's the only thing that they've ever found that represents the face of Nimrod. Now, the name Nimrod comes from the Hebrew verb marad, meaning rebel. By adding an N before the M, it becomes an infinitive construct according to Hebrew linguists, and I'm not one of them. And therefore they come up with the name Nimrod. And that name means, as we've seen, the rebel, or we will rebel. So that's the meaning of this man's name. And of course it's that rebellion that we've just read about in Genesis chapter 11 and verses 1 to 9. Now this came about because Cush had a son. Just come back to chapter 10 of Genesis and verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod, it says, and he began to be a mighty one, a Gibor, a mighty warrior in the earth. We're going to talk about that mighty warrior status of Nimrod in a moment. Let's just have a look though at this phrase, Cush begat Nimrod. Now, this is not exactly, this phrase here, Nimrod ben Cush, is not exactly the Hebrew, this is not the same word as begat, but the idea is the same, isn't it? Nimrod is the son of Cush. Just happens to have a numerical value of 666. This is all quite accidental, of course. Nimrod, you add up, there's every consonant in the Hebrew language has a numerical value. So N is 50, etc. You add up Nimrod, 294. Ben is 52. Cush is 320. It comes to 666. Isn't that interesting? That Cush begat Nimrod, and this phrase, Nimrod ben Cush in the Hebrew, has that value. I don't think that is really accidental. Now Cush was the father of Nimrod, and I want to spend some time on this gentleman because, you know, we don't give him the place that is due. We talk about Nimrod, but we don't give Cush his rightful place in history. History records that Cush, who's also called Kish and Bel, settled in Babylon first. Cush was the great original prophet of the Babylonian mysteries. Bel, the confounder, refers to the fact that it was his ideology that led to the confusion of the tongues of mankind. I want you to come to Isaiah 46. We'll have a look at these three references. I don't normally do this, but I think it's probably worthwhile doing it. I want you to see the name of this man in print in Isaiah chapter 46 and at verse 1. We read this. Bel boweth down. Now there's Cush. The name Bel ultimately became Baal, B-A-A-L. Now I've been to a temple of Bel about 12 months ago, less than 12 months ago, when we went through several Bible lands. Some of you will have seen the DVDs of that. We went to the temple of Bel at a place called Tadmor, which Solomon built, right on the fringes, the eastern fringes of his kingdom. He built Tadmor. It's an oasis. There's a massive acreage there of palm trees and so on. It's water. It's in the middle of the desert. Anyway, there's a temple of Bel there, well preserved, or reasonably well preserved. So that temple was dedicated to Cush, the founder of the Babylonian mysteries. Now the symbol of Bel was a club, a bit like a baseball bat. You know, what do you use a baseball bat for? You know, it's not something gentle, is it? You know, baseball bat, boom, you smash things into 1,000 pieces. So Bel is the one responsible for scattering mankind, confounding their tongues. God holds him responsible because he was the one that invented the ideas, the doctrines. He wrote Nimrod's statement of faith. And it was Nimrod who implemented it. So this man Cush occupies a very, very important place in the scheme of things. Just come over to Jeremiah. No, sorry, just stay here in Isaiah 46 verse. I haven't finished the verse, have I? Bel, or Cush, boweth down. Nebo. Now, Nebo, of course, is a reference to the patron of culture and learning. This is the part of the name Nebuchadnezzar. I've also been to a temple of Nebo in the same place at Tadmor, just across the road from the temple of Bel. Nebo stoopeth down, their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle, etc. So we've got these two gods of Babylon, both of which were to play a prominent part in the history of Israel and of the world. Come over to Jeremiah chapter 50. Now, many of you will be aware that Jeremiah 50 and 51 provide the roots for Revelation chapter 18 in particular. You may not be aware that the name Babylon is used 55 times in these two chapters, Jeremiah 50 and 51. But I'll just show you the way that this language is picked up in Revelation. You have a look at verse 8 of Jeremiah 50. Remove out of the midst of Babylon, that's Revelation 18 verse 4. Come out of her, my people. Have a look at verse 15, end of the verse. Take vengeance upon her, for as she hath done, do unto her. That's Revelation 18 verse 6. Have a look at verse 27. Slay all her bullocks, let them go down to the slaughter. Woe unto them, for their day is come. That's Revelation 18 verse 8. Have a look at verse 29 towards the end. Recompense her according to her work, according to all that she hath done. Do unto her, Revelation 18 verse 16, and so on. If you work through Jeremiah 50, 51, you'll find that the language of Revelation 18 is drawn from these two chapters. That's just a couple of little hints. So who is in these chapters? Have a look at verse 2 of chapter 50. Verse 1 talks about the word of Yahweh against Babylon. Verse 2 says, Declare ye among the nations, and publish, and set up a standard, publish, and conceal not, say, Babylon is taken. Bel is confounded. His symbol is a club. His name means the confounder. So God's using the name of Bel, a play on the name. Babylon's to be destroyed. Who was the man responsible for the ideologies, the mysteries that came to produce this place? This man, Cush. And he's to be confounded. Have a look at Jeremiah 51 and verse 44. It says this, And I will punish Bel in Babylon. Bel in Babylon? Of course you would. And I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he has swallowed up, and the nation shall not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. Now, read the next verse. Verse 45. My people, go ye out of the midst of her. That's Revelation 18 verse 4. I mean, you can go through this chapter. There are simply dozens of references that are picked up in Revelation chapter 18. This is the roots of that prophecy. And it all comes from this gentleman, Cush, the father of Nimrod, and his son, who implemented his policies and his doctrines. Now, in the Chaldean, Bel means to break in pieces, to scatter abroad. That's Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 9, isn't it? Now, Bel was later called Baal. So when Israel came into the land, there were Canaanites in the land who were Baal worshippers. They had to eradicate them completely. He was also called Janus. And we're going to talk a bit about Janus later on. Cush began a form of false religion that spread throughout the entire area of Mesopotamia and Canaan. And what we have here is the principle that God spells out in Micah chapter 6 verse 16. That states, as you can read on the screen, For the statutes of Omri are kept, and all the works of the house of Ahab. Now there's your equation, there's your formula. And that formula, which applied to Omri, the father of Ahab, came from Cush and Nimrod. In the same way that Omri was a statute maker, he was a city builder, and he gave to his son Ahab a platform, a basis, an ideology, a set of doctrines, so Cush gave to Nimrod a platform upon which he could build his kingdom. So Yahweh picks that up. He's actually basing it on Genesis 10 and 11, but the statutes of Omri are kept in all the works of the house of Ahab. We had another hour. I could actually demonstrate to you that the history of Ahab and Jezebel is the roots of the apocalypse, the destruction of that system. We don't have that time. Now, back here in Genesis chapter 11, when we'll return there, we read about this building of the Tower of Babel. Now, what were they doing? What was their primary objective? Well, it was rebellion against Yahweh, yes, but let's have a close read of Genesis chapter 11. So the whole earth, verse 1, was of one safar, one lip, one language. And ultimately, of course, when we come to Zephaniah chapter 3, we're going to see that that's actually a reference to religion. It came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt in it. We're going to talk later on about Shinar and who that represents. And then they said one to another, "Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and slime or bitumen they had for mortar. And then, verse 4, they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven." Now, why are they going to do this? What's the purpose of building a tower that reaches to heaven? Well, it's got two purposes. One, it's a direct challenge to him who dwells in the heavens. And two, it's a way of escaping another flood. And we're going to see that tonight. The history records that was one of the aims of Nimrod in building this tower. But one of the greatest reasons for this was to make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Make us a name. Now that word happens to be Shem, as we're going to see shortly. Let us make us a name. Shem means a name or a noun. And it's possibly a deliberate play on the name of Shem, who becomes Melchizedek, installed as Yahweh's priest in Salem. And Brother Thomas says in Israel, it is probable that Shem was the personage to whom Abraham paid tithes on his return from the slaughter of the kings. So what were they doing? What were they aiming to achieve? Well, this rebellion sought to promote a counterfeit religion. The ancient Antichrist was their purpose. They were going to make themselves a name. And Nimrod was going to usurp the authority of God. He was going to put forth himself as the one who could have dominion over the wild beasts. And that was God's prerogative, wasn't it? He was going to usurp that. And because he usurped it, he could claim to be God on earth. And Revelation chapter 11 verse 4 talks about the two witnesses standing before the God of the earth. It's the papacy. And this is its origins, way back here in Genesis chapter 11. The establishment of a name of blasphemy. That's what he was about. And this is what God did. This was his answer to Nimrod's rebellion. Now in the beginning, the Elohim said in Genesis 1 verse 26, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness." Notice the language. Let us. It's a divine prerogative. Let us. They had the power. They were sent on the mission. The Elohim said, God has sent us on this mission. Let us make man in our image and after our likeness. But now man defies that objective. In Genesis 11 verse 3, they say, "Go to, let us make brick." In verse 4 they say, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower." In verse 4 they say, "Let us make us a name." So what does God do in response? Well, in verse 7, he sends his angels. "Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." In the beginning, when God made man in his own image and after his own likeness, it was for religious purposes. It was that man might manifest God. The very first doctrine of the Bible is God manifestation. It occurs in Genesis 1 verse 1, doesn't it? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Teaches God manifestation. How? Well, you've got the plural term Elohim used, and the singular verb bara, created. and nobody confuses singular and plural. As Brother Thomas points out in Help Us Israel, that's a grammatical error. Give that to an English professor and he would say that's nonsense. You never confuse the singular verb with a plural noun. You don't do that. God did in the very first verse of the Bible. Why? Because he's teaching the doctrine of God manifestation. A multitude of angels representing one. He's the creator. So the literal translation of Genesis 1 verse 1 is, in the beginning, Elohim, he created the heavens and the earth. How did God do it? Through a multitude of those who manifested his power and his glory. That's his purpose. God manifestation in the first verse of the Bible. It's the primary doctrine of the Bible. That's what he was setting out to do in Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image. What do they do? Create a name of blasphemy. So what is he going to do in response to that? Let us go down and confound their language. In other words, their religion. So they won't speak the same doctrine. They won't speak the same language. So that's why he sent his angels to confound them. Now let's come back to Genesis 10 verse 9. Who was the leader of this rebellion? Who was the one that made the suggestion to create a name of blasphemy? Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Genesis 10 verse 9. It was Nimrod. And we are told in that verse, he was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Now the word mighty, as I said, Gibor. The word hunter means the chase. So he's a mighty warrior, or a hero of the chase, as Rotherham translates that phrase. Chase of what? Well, initially animals, to subdue them, but then of men, as we're going to see. Even as Nimrod, it says, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. Now this word before is very important. It's the Hebrew word pani. Means in front of, before, to be, to front, the front of, in the presence of, in the face of, at the face or front of. Pretty obvious, isn't it? But in this context, it means in the face of. You know, they use that phrase today, don't you? He's in your face, they say. What's that? Well, it's a challenge, isn't it? He's in your face. And that's exactly what Nimrod was. He was in the face of God. He was challenging him. And that is why, of course, he becomes the first God King, because he usurps divine authority. Now, Q and Dalish in their commentary on this say, in the face of Yahweh can only mean in defiance of Yahweh, as Josephus and the Targums understand it. The Targum of Jonathan is one of those referred to by the previous writer. From the foundation of the world, none was ever found like Nimrod, powerful in hunting and in rebellions against the Lord. So here was a man that became a mighty hunter, and that was all designed to usurp divine authority. So as I said, there's the Assyrian kings, and this goes up to 669 BC, so it's a long time after Nimrod. He was 2260 or something like that. This here represents the Assyrian king's way of maintaining their power. They got that tradition from Nimrod, a mighty hunter in defiance of Yahweh. This is how they preserved their authority before their people, by subduing the animals, which was a divine prerogative. Now, archaeologists have found tablets. This is the 11th tablet you can see down here. Tablets which record what is called the Gilgamesh epic. Anybody ever heard of the Gilgamesh epic before? Yep, we've got at least one. Now the question is the Gilgamesh of this epic story actually Nimrod? I want to spend a little bit of time on that. Gilgamesh was a vile, filthy man. His arrogance, ruthlessness and depravity were a subject of grave concern for the cities of Europe. That is Erech, his kingdom. We're going to go back and have a look at Erech in a minute, in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 10. They sought to distract his mind from the warrior's daughter and the nobleman's spouse, whom it appears he would not leave in peace. You can see what sort of man he was. Dr. David P. Livingston makes this comment on the Gilgamesh epic. In the epic, the hero is a vile, filthy, perverted person, yet he is presented as the greatest, strongest hero that ever lived. So that the one who sent the flood will not trouble them anymore, Gilgamesh sets out to kill the perpetrator. So he actually sets out in the epic to kill the perpetrator of the flood, meaning Yahweh. Come on! Can men do that? Well, he tried. Josephus in his Antiquities says this. He also, he's talking about Nimrod, he also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again. For that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. So there was an anger against God. So when it says in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 9 that he was a mighty hunter before Yahweh, don't get the idea that that means that God looked down and said, oh, he's brilliant, look at him, chasing lions, he's terrific. No, this is about Nimrod in the face of Yahweh, defying him and usurping his authority and becoming himself God upon the earth. Gilgamesh challenges Yahweh. In the epic, Gilgamesh says, if I fall, I will establish a name for myself. That's Genesis 11 verse 4. Let us make us a name. Gilgamesh is fallen, they will say, in combat with terrible Huwawa. And the Huwawa of the epic is the biblical Yahweh. So that's his challenge, you see. Josephus adds this. Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it was through his means that they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into a constant dependence upon his own power. So you're going to turn men from God? Create yourself as a god, and they will then eventually distance themselves from the God of heaven. That was his policy. I think I know another gentleman who sits somewhere in the middle of the world today in a place called Rome, in a building called the Vatican, who has similar ideas. You know him too? Yeah, Papa, the Pope. Because this gentleman, Nimrod, was the first Pope, and that's where these traditions come from. Now, the essential characteristics of Nimrod's heathen religion are spelled out by Alfred Edersheim, the Jewish Christian, who wrote many books, one of them the Bible history, the Old Testament. And he makes this statement. Even Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian, regards Nimrod as the father of heathenism, the characteristic of which is to find strength and happiness in sin, and not in God. Its essential principle is to reject all that is not seen, and to cling to that which is temporal. Idolatry is the religion of sight in opposition to that of faith. Instead of the unseen creator, man regarded that which was visible, the sun, the moon, the stars, as the cause and ruler of all. Or else he converted his heroes, real or imaginary, into gods. The worship of the heavens, the worship of nature, or the worship of man, such is heathenism and idolatry, says Edersheim. The worst of it was that man gradually became conformed to his religion. He first imputed his own vices to his gods, and next it imitated the vices of his gods. Now man wouldn't do that, surely. Or does he? You know, the film industry is only a year or two ahead of society, and society is catching up with the film. So they'll depict things in films that people then practice. That's why the world's like it is today. And I wonder who's responsible for the film industry. Jews. Incredible, isn't it? The people who are supposed to have one God. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, we carry on. In the first of Chronicles chapter 1 verse 10, we read this statement. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be mighty upon the earth. The Chaldee paraphrase for that verse says, Cush begat Nimrod, who began to prevail in wickedness, for he shed innocent blood and rebelled against Jehovah, they say, or Yahweh. Now, this brings another aspect into it. Whereas Nimrod initially established his power by becoming a mighty hunter and pursuing and killing animals, wild beasts, the time came when he turned his attention to his opposition to men. And murder became his policy. Anybody who opposed him, like Lamech of old, was subject to very real danger. He was going to murder them. So Keelan Dalish make this comment about that. Nimrod, hunter of men. They say Nimrod was mighty in hunting, and that in opposition to Yahweh. He founded a powerful kingdom, and the founding of this kingdom is shown by the verb with consecutive to have been the consequence or result of his strength in hunting. Hence, if the expression a mighty hunter relates primarily to hunting in the literal sense, we must add to the literal meaning the figurative signification of a hunter of men, a trapper of men, by stratagem and force. Nimrod the hunter became a tyrant, a powerful hunter of men. So persecution of opposition becomes characteristic of Nimrod's kingdom. I think I know another kingdom, another power that has a history of persecution of its opposition. The Jerusalem Targum goes on to say this about Nimrod, the hunter of the sons of men. He was powerful in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord, for he was a hunter of the sons of men. And he said to them, "Depart from the judgment of the Lord, and adhere to the judgment of Nimrod." Therefore it is said, as Nimrod is the strong one, strong in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord. So the hunting of men became the occupation of this system, when it had established its power on the basis of the hunting of wild beasts. I want to talk now about where this all led. When this confusion of tongues came about in Genesis chapter 11, what happened then? Did Nimrod say, well, oh look, this has been unfortunate, we can't understand each other, well let's just give up, shall we? We won't bother anymore. Did he say that? No. And we're going to see exactly what he did. We're going to have a look at this city builder, the beginning of whose kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar, as it says in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 10. For he was a city builder. And guess what? One of the cities that he built, this one here called Erech, was based upon, if not the same place, the name of the very first city built by a man. You know that? It was Cain's city rebuilt. Bryce Self, in a book called Semiramis, Queen of Babylon, makes this statement. It was in Mesopotamia that the first cities were built after the flood. And the first of these was quite naturally named after the very first city built by man, before the flood, Enoch. And Cain was the builder of that city. Cain built a city called Enoch, naming it after his son. Due to vagaries of linguistic permutation, this name has come down to us as Erech or Uruk in the Sumerian language, the Babylonian language. Interesting, isn't it? So when we read in Genesis chapter 10, in verse 10, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel or Babylon, and Erech is the rebuilding of Enoch, the very first city built by men. Now, Nimrod was the builder of mega cities. This was the first of them. He established Babel, Erech, Akkad and Calneh in Genesis 10 verse 10, and then you read on to verse 11, it says this. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh. And that's a very poor translation in the authorised version. The margin is better. And in fact it should read this way, as the RV has it. Out of that land he went forth into Assyria and builded Nineveh. So this is Nimrod. This is his second mega city. Now some confuse the Asher here with one of the sons of Shem. If you turn the page to Genesis chapter 10 and verse 22, it says, the children of Shem were Elam and Asher. Some think that the Asher of verse 11 is that Asher. It's not. This is not a reference to Asher, the son of Shem. This is a reference to Nimrod, who goes forth into Assyria and builds another mega city, Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah and Rezin. Now these were mega cities. Do you recall when Jonah went to Nineveh, that it was a city of 3 days' journey? Remember that? 60 miles? You can walk 20 miles in a day? Do you think that Nineveh itself was 60 miles across? I mean, that would make New York look like a little Sunday school class. wouldn't it? 60 miles across. What does it mean? Well, it means this, that there were actually 4 towns built on 4 corners, and they built a wall between them, so the wild beasts couldn't come in. All right? So Nimrod protected his people from the wild beasts by building this wall. 2 mega cities, walled them off. 4 corner cities to protect his people. So when they planted their crops, no problem. Wild beasts can't get in there. Pretty smart, isn't it? No wonder they worshipped him as a god. He protected them from the wild beasts. Took away the divine prerogative. The earliest Babylonian kings bore the title 4 races. So he builds 2 mega cities with 4 cities in the corners, and they got a title called the 4 races. When God called Abram and developed from him the nation of Israel, the nation was marked by 4. There were 4 mothers for the 12 tribes. The 4 square encampment of Israel formed at Sinai. 4 standards. And you can go on and on, can't you? The perfect cube, the 4 square, most holy. The nation of Israel was stamped by 4. I wonder why. Because God is unwinding the work of Nimrod. That's why. See? This is his answer to Nimrod. Call Abraham, begin with him, and do what we talked about in the last session. Ultimately, through Abraham, he will be rid of Nimrod, and he will have established the kingdom of God in its fullness. Now, what about this building of the Tower of Babel? I want to now bring this down to our times, because I think most of us are familiar with what's happening in Europe. As I said, this is Peter Bruegel's fanciful painting of the Tower of Babel. It looked nothing like that, but it's important that we look at that picture. They didn't finish it. You know, it had this top which wasn't finished. The language was confused, so they had to give up, go elsewhere. And the Europeans are rebuilding it, they think. This is their poster from the 1980s. You've seen this, haven't you? With the 12 stars representing European nations. Wonder what that's about. That's the Tower of Babel, according to Peter Bruegel's painting. Okay? You know what they say on this poster? Europe, many tongues. Yeah, God confused our tongues. One voice. Happens to have 3 parts to it. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. It's the voice, 3 unclean spirits, like frogs, the voice of the French Revolution. Many tongues, we don't speak the same language. Germans, French, Belgian, Dutch, they don't speak the same language. They've still got the languages that God gave them back in Genesis chapter 11. Doesn't matter. We're not going to let that stop us. We're going to rebuild the Tower of Babel. Isn't that pretentious? And so when they designed their new Parliament building in Strasbourg, which is on the border of Germany and France, smack on the border, and I've been through there, guess what? The design was based on Bruegel's painting of the Tower of Babel. This is not an unfinished building. This is not a building that they decided, well look, we'll just leave these big gaps here. This is the finished building. It's designed that way so it looks like that. Accident? Don't think so. They use that building once every 6 weeks. They've got to bus and train everybody across from the headquarters in Brussels to hold meetings in this building. Otherwise, of course, it's a white elephant. Well, it is a white elephant. It's a waste of money. So they've got to use it once every 6 weeks. But it's based on the Tower of Babel. Now, they had plans in the early 1990s to actually build a literal Tower of Babel. You know that? This was the plan. Now, this is out of a newspaper, Towering Ambitions. Now, you notice down the bottom here, you see this red line that comes down. See this building down here? Pretty small, isn't it? That is the Berlaymont building. This is that building here, the Berlaymont. This is the headquarters of the European Union. This is where all the public servants hang out. Now, of course, you'll see it's in the design of a cross. A crooked cross, by the way. because it's based on Catholicism. When 6 nations met in Rome in 1956, 6 nations, all right, in 1956, and they signed the Common Market Agreement. That's where the European Union came from. So when they built the headquarters, it was in the shape of a cross because the papacy had underwritten that system. It was at the base of it. They were going to build a building over the top. They're going to put the legs in the points of the cross, okay, down here and here. And they're going to build this building, which was 1 kilometre high. That's 0.6 of a mile. 1 kilometre high. And from the top of that, you would see for 120 kilometres, they reckon. There would be restaurants and all sorts of things up in here. Hotels, well, of course, they never had the money to build it. But that was their ambition. They wanted to build another Tower of Babel. Europe, many tongues, one voice. See? So they're rebuilding. And there's their building in Strasbourg, based on the Tower of Babel. Now, let's talk about Janus. Janus is the Roman version of Nimrod. Bel was one of the titles of Cush. His son Nimrod took over from his father. So eventually, of course, Nimrod became known as Bel and Janus. But originally those titles were those of Cush. Now Janus is the god of doors and gateways. That's why our year begins with January. Because it's the beginning. You know that? That's why the gentleman or the lady in most hotels who has the job of cleaning up your mess when you left the hotel is called a janitor. You know that? Because they're at the front. And they got the buckets and the mops and the brooms, and they'll clean up after you. See? They're the door. Our month January comes from Janus, and sadly I'll have to tell you that my birthday's in January. But I'm not a worshipper of Janus. So who is this Janus? Well, he's, as I said, the Roman version of Nimrod. Now his temples had special features. The doors faced east and west to the beginning and the ending of the day, because he was the god of doors and gateways and beginnings. Between the eastern and western doors stood his statue. Now this is his statue down here, with 2 faces, gazing in opposite directions, one to the east, one to the west. Now these 2 faces were different. One face was young and the other was old. The old face was Nimrod, and the younger face was his reincarnation in Tammuz, sometimes known as Zoroaster. Tammuz is the biblical name for the son of Nimrod. His symbols were a key and a cock. I want you to notice this, a key. There's his key in the hand, see? And of course you've got the rooster down here. Key and a cock. Now cardinals, which is from the Latin cardo, which means hinges, were derived from the priests of Janus, the god of doors and hinges. And they were ordained by no one else but Semiramis. She had priests, 2 orders of priests. One wore red gowns. They were the only ones who had access to her. Just like the cardinals are the only ones who can go into the inner chamber and vote one of their number to become the next Nimrod. Alright? So they go in there, and if they succeed, you get white smoke. If they don't succeed, you get black smoke. And they stay there. They don't come out. They stay there until they've got a new pope. Cardinals wear red gowns. Where do they get that from? Well, Semiramis. And of course the lower order priests wore black robes. Why? Because they tended the fires. And you tend to get dirty when you're playing with charcoal. So black robes don't show the dirt. That's the lower order of priests. What do the ordinary Catholic priests wear? Black gowns. Got it? It all comes from Janus. Now here's a Google Earth shot. You'll be confused for a while. Which direction does the Vatican face? Anyone know? Let's see how good your eyes are.
South.
You reckon it faces south, Jason? Anybody else?
East, west.
Yeah, you're dead right. Down here is the compass. East is that way, right? West is that way. So this is east-west. You know how I know that's true? I went there in 2005 and I walked up this street. Here's the forecourt of the Vatican, by the way. I walked up the street to the Tiber. And it was 11 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't believe, summertime, couldn't believe the power of the sun was coming straight down that street. The sun was over here, it was bearing down upon the Vatican as I walked up that street. So the Vatican faces east. I wonder why. Well, it's based on the temple of Janus, that's why. Now, did you happen to notice the shape of this building? It's a key, isn't it? You see, there's the handle of the key. That's the part that you use in your fingers to turn it. And here's the part that goes into the lock, okay? It's a key. I wonder where they got that from. Well, Janus is the god of doors and locks. His symbol is a key. Okay? And they want you to know that, don't they? When you go here, it's the key of Janus. So, guess what? When you walk in every single door of the Vatican, that's what you see. The keys of the kingdom of heaven, they say, which were given to Peter, who they allege is the first pope. Wrong. He was never a pope. The first pope was Nimrod. Okay? Now you think, well, that's enough. We don't want to have any more keys. I happened to climb the 556 steps to the top of the Vatican, and you get up there, and you've got to be pretty thin. You wouldn't make it, Michael. Too tall, too big. You get up there, you get up this like corkscrew, and you go up to the top here, and you look out over the Vatican. I have photographs looking down that way and looking over this way. Guess what's at the back? Down here, a garden bed. Guess what shape the flowers are in? 2 keys. They want you to know who they are, or who they think they are. And there's another thing we're going to talk about a bit later. When you're at the top here, you see what you see throughout this building, the letters PM. Now, we in Australia have a Prime Minister. Let me tell you, it's not Prime Minister that they're referring to. You look over the top here, and on this, I was actually here in this little part, you look over this, the roof of the Vatican, which is directly above the altar below, where the Pope sits, and I felt like perhaps using a bomb to crash it down, but anyway. You look over the roof of this building, and they've got this little air vents that sit up. Every single one of them has the name of a Pope on it, starting with the words PM. We'll see what that means in a moment. It's actually the title of Nimrod. Now, let's talk about Semiramis for a while. She doesn't get the public exposure that she should get because she's hidden in the Bible. Anyone know if the name Semiramis is in the Bible? Well, not in that form, but it is. It's there very prominently. We shall see. And the hanging gardens of Semiramis. You heard about Nebuchadnezzar, who built one of the wonders of the ancient world for his Persian wife who missed her home. Forget it. He refurbished it, yes, but he didn't build the hanging gardens. You know who built that? Semiramis. They were her product. See this over here? This is a depiction of the Tower of Babel in Babylon. Now, who is this Semiramis? Now, Semiramis is the Hellenized form of the Akkadian name Semiramat, or Seremat, which means the gift of the sea. Semer, which is the basis of this name, when translated into Hebrew becomes Shinar, the biblical name for Lower Mesopotamia. So every time you read Shinar, you should read Semiramis. So let's read Genesis chapter 11 and verse 1 and 2. Verse 1 says, "And the whole earth was of one language, or one lip, and of one speech." That word speech is debar, one word. "And it came to pass as they journeyed, not from the east, but towards the east," as it should read, "that they found a plain, a wide level valley," it means, in the land of Shinar, in the land of Semiramis, and they dwelt there. Now, I don't need to tell you what Zechariah chapter 5 says about the apostasy that would grow in the brotherhood, about a woman and an ephah that ends up being two women who take the wings of a stork and fly to the land of Shinar. That's about the apostasy of the Roman Catholic Church arising out of the brotherhood through the commercialised religion that they brought back from Babylon. Judaism in the brotherhood, which ultimately corrupted it, made it commercial, and ended up becoming the Catholic Church. That came from us. And it's called the land of Shinar because, you see, at the root of this was a very savage woman, an evil woman named Semiramis, the wife, son-alleged the mother of Nimrod. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Legend says she was raised by doves, the symbol of peace. You know that the pretension of this system is just incredible. Raised by doves, the symbol of peace, and of rest to him to Noah, isn't it? She came out of the ark, this lady. So she thinks. She came from the ecclesia. That's where Catholicism came from. The ecclesia. Revelation 2. I have one thing against you, Thyatira. You suffer that woman Jezebel. Who did Jezebel match herself against? Semiramis, the first mother of harlots. Now, this dove is also the symbol of Astarte. Now, here is the seal of Semiramis. Looks like a Catholic nun to me, but anyway, that'll do. There's two doves, all right? This one on the obverse side of the coin is a dove with an olive branch in its beak. And when Noah sent the dove out of the ark, came back with an olive branch. The pretension is unbelievable, isn't it? Now, this is not Semiramis, but this is a queen from the similar era of time, 2500 BC. And you can see, of course, that she's quite gaudily done up. Her eyes are painted. She's got that many earrings in her ears that probably she would sink into the snow. She's got all of this stuff all over her head. That's the kind of image that you can expect if you actually saw Semiramis. And what kind of woman was she like? Well, she was the builder of the Hanging Gardens. She was also responsible for the building of the Ishtar Gate. Now, this was the entrance to Babylon. This was the processional way. Then you've got the ziggurat over there, you see. This was the way to the palace. The Ishtar Gate, or the Astarte Gate. We get our Easter from that, don't we? And here, when the kings of the region came to visit Nimrod and Semiramis to celebrate the great festival of Ishtar, linked as they were to the notorious orgies of Semiramis. You know what she used to do when her subject kings came to Babylon? She would commit adultery with them, fornication. She was the first mother of harlots with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. That's Revelation 18, isn't it? That's where that came from. I told you that there's no prophecy after this that doesn't have its roots here. You're becoming convinced of that? There isn't any prophecy. It all comes from here. So we have in the Apocalypse, in Revelation chapter 17, this harlot woman with this inscribed on her forehead. Mystery. Babylon the Great. The mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now I want you to come to Revelation chapter 17. We're almost done. Revelation chapter 17. And we read in verse 1. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Well, isn't that interesting? Semiramis means the gift of the sea. It's all based upon the flood. See? She thinks she comes out of the ark. She represents herself by a dove. She is known as the gift of the sea. In Revelation 17 verse 15 we are told what these waters represent. Verse 15 says, He saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So here is the paramour of world rulers. And we read on to verse 2. With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, just like they did when they came to visit Semiramis. She would take them off into a side room and commit fornication with them. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. No doubt about who that is. Rome. So here is the system. Why does God use a woman? Well, a woman's a symbol of an ecclesiastical system. Yes. The woman that was espoused to Christ committed fornication, brought forth the man of sin. Revelation 12. Constantine, born 280 years after apostasy began in the ecclesia. The exact period of human gestation, 280 days. Yes, true. But where does this woman really come from? From Semiramis, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, the wife and alleged mother of Nimrod. And if Nimrod is God, then God has a mother. And to the Catholics, Christ is God. And God has a mother. Mary, they call her. Interesting, eh? So there's no doubt where the roots of that system are from. And there's no doubt who the popes are. Because this is a photo that I took with my own camera. Standing on this marvellous marble of the floor of the Vatican, which just happens to be 666 feet long. Quite accidental, of course. And this is what you see everywhere. I saw literally thousands of these. Can you see them? Pont, P-O-N-T, dot, max, dot, pont. That's short for Pontifex Maximus. It's rather unusual, almost like a clown's name, isn't it? Pontifex Maximus. You know, you can sort of see, this is Roman, obviously. Well, is it? No. This is Babylonian. So where does Pontiff come from? The Pope is acknowledged as the Pontifex Maximus of the Roman Church. That's why they've got these PMs everywhere. PM Leo and PM this and PM that. Because he was the head of the Roman Church, the Pontifex Maximus. The title of pagan Roman emperors who were official high priests of the pagan mysteries was also Pontifex Maximus. The title can be traced right back to Nimrod. That was the title that he gave himself. Pontifex Maximus. An additional fact, the supreme pontiff of paganism bore the Chaldean title Peter, which meant the interpreter of the mysteries. Little wonder that they elected for their first pope Peter. The office of Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest, was to declare and interpret the divine law and preside over sacred rites. In other words, to read, to declare and to publish the doctrines of Cush, Bel, the confounder, the man who was ultimately responsible for the doctrines that led to the confounding of the tongues of men. Is it little wonder that God is going to overturn this system? And he started by calling one man out of the very heart of it, a man called Abram. I called him alone. One man. I'll start with him And when I'm finished, this guy and all his pontiffs and interpreters and Peters will be gone. And I will be magnified in one nation upon the earth when I've destroyed the kingdom of men that Nimrod created. That's what God is saying to us. And we have the great privilege, brethren and sisters, of not only knowing these things, but shortly to participate in the fulfilment of them. To be part of that band of people who will go out and destroy that system for good. And 40 years after Armageddon, certainly by 2060, there will not be one Pope or Roman Catholic left on earth. That's the job that you've got in front of you the next 40 years of Christ, or 50 years that Christ comes tomorrow. And let's hope that he soon comes to put an end to that system.